The Mandela Effect is a rather recent phenomenon that started on the internet back around 2010. It was given its name by a woman called Fiona Bloom, a person within a group of people who falsely believed that Nelson Mandela died in prison back in 1991. In reality, he became the South African president in 1994 and lived until 2013. After finding out that he was alive and well during that time, many internet users on Reddit began to give multiple theories on why this situation has occurred, pointing out other misremembered phenomena. In psychological terms, the Mandela effect is defined by collective misremembering of well-known details and phenomena. It's characterized by the recollection of either events that didn't happen at all or events that happened differently than the way that they are remembered. An example of this would be misremembered spelling of famous logos. Take Fruit Loops. In reality, it is actually spelled with double O, however, many people assume that it is spelled as fruit with a U and an I. Also, take Looney Tunes, which is actually spelled with a U, while many people remembering the word tunes being spelled with a double O. And finally, take Bernstein Bears, that is actually spelled with an A or an AI instead of an EI, as many people remember. So it's actually Berenstain Bears and not Bernstein Bears, as many people assume.
Before we talk about the psychological basis for the Mandela effect, we have to look at previous studies done on collaborative inhibition or impaired memory when people remember in larger groups. So, in their 2010 research paper, entitled Collaborative Memory, Cognitive Research and Theory, Soperna Ragaram and Luciane Pereira-Pearson aim to illuminate the cognitive aspects of collaborative inhibition. One finding of their studies that they looked into argued that there is a strong positive correlation between size group and strength of collaborative inhibition or memory impairment in social and collective remembering. Factors that strengthen collaborative inhibition include type of memory task, so what you are asked to recall, social contagion errors, and social pressure. But what are social contagion errors? Social contagion errors occur when one's memory is impacted by another errors of another person. So, suppose you are sitting with your family and your uncle recalls the events that happened in last year Christmas. If your uncle has recalled or misremembered a certain event and stated that something happened even though it didn't happen, for example, you are likely to misremember that event, and also it would become part of your memory, even though this error was his and not yours. Regarding the implications of this 2010 study, the researchers state that collaboration can hurt memory when it results in extended forgetting. So, when there are socially induced false memories due to repetition of false information in larger groups. So, the more false information is repeated among a larger group, the more likely that you are going to misremember that information and also believe that this false information is actually true and that it actually happened at some point. One interesting finding in this 2010 paper is that when one retells the details of a certain event to another, the untold rest of the details are more likely to become forgotten or misremembered. So, suppose you go and tell your friend about your first day of school. The details that you do not tell and omit from your story, the one that you're telling to your friend, these same details are likely to be misremembered, even though you haven't shared them with another person. Thus, working together on memory and sharing our memories with one another can actually have a negative impact on our cognitive basis for remembering information.
Looking at another study, in their 2000 research paper, Mary Susan Weldon, Cassidy Blair, Penny Derman Hupsch looked into the effects of social loafing on collaborative remembering. So they wanted to see if the reason behind collaborative inhibition when it comes to people remembering in groups is social loafing. Social loafing is when people have reduced motivation or reduced work ethic as a result of the distribution of effort among members of a group. So what these researchers did is try to counteract this reduced motivation by enhancing motivation in the participants of their experiments, and they wanted to see if social loafing was the main culprit behind collaborative inhibition or remembering less information when people work in groups. Surprisingly, these researchers concluded that social loafing is not the main culprit of collaborative inhibition. And they also argue that hearing other people recall certain items disrupts one's own retrieval strategies, making it difficult to access material that would otherwise be available. So, while social loafing is not the main reason behind collaborative inhibition, according to the study, the researchers argue that every person has a different retrieval strategies, and people remembering together might disrupt each other's strategies or ways of recollecting and retrieving certain events. Their implications also state that collaborative recall can be seen as a divided attention tasks, requiring resources both to be allocated to both recall and social monitoring. So we know that a very famous psychological phenomenon is divided attention, where people cannot do enough effort if their attention is distributed across two things. So our brain can't multitask, and when it does, then this results in encoding failure or failure to remember information that would otherwise be easily accessible if our attention was only dedicated to remembering this piece of information.
And now, connecting this information to the Mandela Effect, by sharing information online, we are less likely to remember the details of this piece of information. We can thank divided attention for that, as our brain becomes too caught up between remembering an event and posting it online. Thus, we are more likely to commit errors the next time we attempt to recollect the details of each information, and our errors can become socially contagious, and they can be repeated by other people who might also misremember this piece of information as a result of their interaction with us.
So, is collaborative remembering always a bad thing? Not quite. In their 2010 research paper, cognitive psychologists Celia Harris, Paul Keel, John Sutton, and Amanda Barnier look into the predicted benefits of collaborative remembering, specifically focusing on older married couples. The study found that when couples used cues and repetition, it enhanced their collaborative remembering skills. However, when couples disagreed, it had a negative effect on their collaborative recall performance. Thus, to preserve your memory with the help of others, you need 3 things. 1. Helpful cues. 2. Repetition of correct information. And 3. Reinforcement of correct details. And finally, don't forget to correct someone if they misremember a certain piece of information, as that might rub off on other individuals.